We're back into the property show on the all-new CNA938. This is Asia First Weekend Edition. This is the property show. Speaking with Paul Ho, serial entrepreneur and the Chief Mortgage Officer at iCompare Loan. Sir, welcome back into the program. And again, I'm just so grateful that you're doing this.
Thank you, sir.
Let's talk about, the fact that, interest rates are pretty low. Even in Singapore, your TDSR, your total debt servicing ratio,
That's
not
right.
Withstanding, loans, I think, have never been, interest rates have never been as low as they have been for this particular juncture. So with this, why is it still not, fueling our property market?
I think we have reached a stage whereby we are having actual demand. Why I say it's actual demand, in the past many years before the cooling measures came in, we have consumption of, consumption, but purchase of properties in the range of like 16,000, 18,000, 20,000 a year. Whereas the normal trend line of new completed condominiums were consumed at the rate of about 8,000 to 9,000 units, or even 7 to 10,000 units. That's the norm, a normal trend line. So if you look at that trend line and you take out, the additional buyer stamp duty and all those things, then what we are seeing now are the actual demand from buyers. Right. So there are a lot of other buyers out there, they're fringe buyers and so on. They do want to buy property, but they are looking at, if I buy, how do I avoid the ABSD? Should I decouple? What about, can I buy a commercial property? Oh, commercial property is only 60 years. Oh no, so a lot of, discussions along that line. And then some of them, they would set up their company to, private limited company to buy a commercial property and so on. Oh, anyway, by the way, I'm also a shareholder in one of the corporate secretary company. We help people set up companies so that they can buy properties and, do a host of other things as well. Yeah.
So let's talk about the actual demand. We've been told that right now the actual demand is from the HDB upgraders. Is this your finding as well? Because they seem to be the ones upgrading, and they're buying new, and given the fact that developers have, I wouldn't say give them a discount, but they've moderated the prices.
I think moderated the prices is one thing. The other thing is that before, I think there was this report by Credit Suisse that came out and said, actually we knew about this long ago, but we just didn't want to, rock the boat and offend the developers. Okay. What they did was they were reissuing the options from the new launches. So people were basically buying the property, and then after they buy the property, and if they cannot transact in time, they will extend and reissue the option to keep extending it, so that they will not end up having to pay the additional buyer stamp duty. Right. Because if they buy a condominium before they sell the HDB, they have 6 months to get rid of the HDB, right? In which case, if their timing is not right, then they will end up having to pay the additional buyer stamp duty, which adds up to, let's say, $1 million property, and you haven't sold your HDB, and you buy your condominium on a $1 million condominium, that's like $120,000. Right.
So are people being caught in this rut?
I haven't actually heard anyone being really caught in it yet, but I said maybe the controller of housing may need to look at this, but I wouldn't recommend that they look at this and put a hard stop to this, because there is no speculation, or not much speculation, so to speak. So people who are buying, they are not flipping. They are not like in the past, they buy the option, so and then they it is for their own consumption. They are just delaying it and reissuing it. I think if property agents are hearing this is Paul Ho, so I'm speaking for you. Yeah. Basically, it's okay for them to reissue a few times. Just close one eye to it. After all, it's a genuine purchase.
So when this sort of practices come into play, we can understand if you are extending it for the fact they're waiting for another property to go for you to occupy this current one. But has the market, we've seen URA numbers coming up and saying that, well, we're still pretty okay, we're still well, we've seen an increase in the price of private property after a long time, and that the resale HDB market hasn't been touched at all, as they say. It seems to be pretty buoyant. So when is this supply going to be soaked up, sir? Is there sufficient demand if this is the actual demand that we're seeing?
Actual demand in Singapore by Singaporeans or Singapore residents being Singapore PR, right. There won't be that much demand. Aging population, in fact, the need for housing we have more than enough houses for everybody, right? But we have a lot of demand from people who want to buy their second and third houses. And obviously, that is without regard for whether they can rent it or not. It's just the demand, it's just the need that people want to do it, right? And Singapore is still one of the few places whereby the rental yield could reach around 2.5% to 3%, and the interest cost is around 2 to 2.5%. It's still lower than the rental yield, or at least the gross rental yield. If you look at other markets, the gross rental yield is lower than the interest cost. So in a lot of markets, technically those markets you cannot invest, but a lot of the times it defies logic, because those are the markets that actually go up a lot, because people use higher cash portion, and there's speculation and so on.
Paul, for this to end this particular segment of the property show, we're going to ask you again, if the US is aiming, or the US Central Bank is aiming to cut interest rates by 50 basis points, are we going to see an interest rate perhaps haircut among the banks as well? Will the banks lower their interest rates here in Singapore?
I wouldn't think so much as the banks lowering their interest rate. It's not really a matter that the banks can unilaterally decide.
Our central bank.
Our central bank actually doesn't control rates, right? Our central banks basically control the exchange rate. So what happens when the US reduce their interest rate? You will see that perhaps there will be more money flowing from the US dollar or US dollar assets or US domiciled locations to Singapore, especially those portfolio funds. So when they come to Singapore, more funds will be available in Singapore. When you have more funds available, the interest rate as a function of the availability of funds, they will be, those funds are not parked here free of charge, right? Obviously, when they park in a bank in Singapore, then they will be looking for Singapore dollar deposits amongst the banks or to lend out this money, right? When they lend out this money, there will be more funds trying to lend out money to the Singapore based banking system, right? So as a result, the interest rate will moderate.
Are we going to see a day, given the fact that we've seen places in Germany, Japan, interest rates are almost less than zero? Will the world see something like this? I mean, a time where you're going to have to pay the bank to put your money in there?
I think this is a little bit of a conspiracy theory kind of thing. What we are seeing that the US dollar is basically gradually becoming a basket case. So I'm not sure if I can say this online, but a 20 trillion economy is owing about 22 to 23 trillion US dollars of federal debt in the US. And they are expanding their budget deficit by $1 trillion a year, right? So at a certain point in time, they will have difficulty servicing even their interest cost. So there is a lot of impetus for them to reduce interest rate so that they can, or at least the government can finance the debt, right? And at a certain stage, they either will have to start war or they will have to really tighten the belts and repay. I think unfortunately, I think the first likelihood is more likely.
Paul Ho is the Chief Mortgage Officer at iCompare Loan. We're talking refinancing, mortgage rates, and a whole lot more. Keep it right here. We will be back after an update of what's happening in the world and on the road. Stay with us. This is the Property Show on weekend edition of Asia First. I'm Keith D'Souza. Nice, sir, but I will take